My name is Kareem Al-Hassan, and I am 41 years old. For most of my life, that name opened doors. It carried respect, trust, and a quiet authority earned through years of discipline. I am a cardiologist, trained to listen to hearts, to read rhythms, to decide who lives and who dies. I was also raised Muslim, deeply, carefully, faithfully, in a home where Islam was not just belief but identity. My earliest memories are of dawn prayers, my father's voice steady as he recited Quran, my mother correcting my posture as I bowed, reminding me that Allah was watching every movement, every thought. I learned early that obedience was safety and questions were danger. I learned to perform faith before I learned to feel anything at all. Outwardly, I succeeded. I memorized verses, fasted every Ramadan, gave zakat, avoided shame. I married well. I became someone the community admired. Inside, however, there was a quiet pressure that never released. Every prayer felt like an exam. Every mistake felt permanent. I feared Allah more than I loved him, and I told myself that fear was righteousness. At night, after long hospital shifts, I lay awake replaying my life, wondering if my good deeds were enough, wondering if my scales would tip the wrong way. I had saved lives with my hands while feeling my own soul slipping. I watched patients die while whispering Shahada, and instead of peace, I felt panic. I asked myself questions I never spoke aloud. How could I ever know I was forgiven? How could anyone be sure of salvation? I pushed those thoughts down because doubt was weakness, and weakness brought disgrace. Still, the silence after my prayers grew louder. I begged Allah for reassurance, for a sign, for rest, but heaven felt sealed. If you are listening to this and something in my words feels familiar, I ask you gently to stay with me. And if these testimonies matter to you, consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing so others who are searching can find them too. I did not know then that my unease was not rebellion but hunger, and that everything I trusted was about to be shaken. I told myself this was simply stress, the cost of responsibility, the burden of leadership. But the truth was deeper and more frightening. Something inside me was waking up, restless, unsatisfied, unwilling to be silenced by routine. Each call to prayer felt heavier, each recitation more mechanical. I was afraid to name the emptiness, afraid that if I did, everything I had built would collapse. I had no idea how close that collapse truly was. That night, my heart carried secrets it could no longer endure. The cracks in my faith did not come with explosions or rebellion. They came quietly, disguised as exhaustion and responsibility. I began noticing them during night shifts, when the hospital lights hummed and the corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear. I watched patients cling to life while whispering desperate du'as, their families pressing prayer beads into their palms as if faith could force the heart to obey. Sometimes it worked. Often it did not. I still remember a young mother with tired eyes and 3 children waiting at home. Her husband begged me to pray harder, to ask Allah again, to not give up. I prayed with him, my forehead on the cold floor, reciting verses I had known since childhood. She died before dawn. When I signed her death certificate, my hands shook, not from grief, but from confusion. That night, I opened the Quran searching for comfort, but instead I found tension. Verses of mercy sat beside verses of punishment, promises of compassion shadowed by threats of fire. My chest tightened as a thought slipped through my defenses. How could perfect justice feel so uncertain? I began asking myself questions I had always avoided. How could anyone know they were accepted by Allah? How much obedience was enough? Was fear really faith? I silenced those thoughts immediately, reminding myself that doubt was whispered by Shaitan and questioning was dangerous. In my culture, faith is inherited like blood, and to question it is to betray your family. I buried myself deeper into work, taking extra shifts, avoiding silence. But the more I ran, the louder my thoughts became. That evening, while reviewing charts in the ICU, a sudden pressure gripped my chest. I ignored it, telling myself it was stress, dehydration, fatigue. Doctors are trained to deny weakness. The pain spread, sharp and crushing, stealing my breath. The room tilted. As I reached for support, I felt a terrifying clarity. Something inside me was failing. The last thought that crossed my mind before the darkness took me was not a prayer of peace, but a plea of panic. Allah, please, I am not ready yet. In that moment, I realized how fragile everything truly was. My certainty, my strength, my belief. I had spent my life treating hearts, yet I had ignored the sickness growing in my own. The monitors blurred as voices echoed around me, distant and urgent, while my consciousness slipped like sand through open fingers. I did not know it then, but that collapse was not an accident. It was a doorway. Beyond fear, beyond training, beyond doctrine. Something unseen was reaching for me as everything familiar began to disappear, and I could not stop it. When my heart stopped, I did not fall asleep, and I did not fade away. Awareness remained, sharp and terrifying. One moment, I was surrounded by alarms and rushing feet. The next, I was suspended in a vast darkness that felt alive. There was no body, yet I felt heavier than I had ever felt in life. Time dissolved. I could not tell if seconds or centuries were passing. What overwhelmed me was not pain but exposure, as if every intention, every secret thought, every compromise I had buried was now visible. Fear wrapped around me, deeper than any fear I had known on earth. I sensed judgment approaching, not spoken, not shouted, but absolute. I understood with brutal clarity that titles meant nothing here. Being a doctor meant nothing. Being Muslim meant nothing. My prayers, my fasting, my charity, all the things I had trusted, felt suddenly thin and fragile, like paper shields before a storm. I realized I had no defense, no argument, no assurance. I tried to recite verses, but there were no words. I tried to call out to Allah, but my voice did not exist. There was only the weight of truth and the knowledge that I could not save myself. Regret flooded me, not regret for sins alone, but regret for a lifetime spent striving without peace. I saw moments from my life flash before me, not as images, but as emotions, fear disguised as obedience, pride hidden behind piety, love withheld because it felt unsafe. I understood then that I had never truly rested, never truly trusted. The darkness pressed closer, and I felt a certainty that terrified me more than hellfire ever had, the certainty that I was about to be separated forever from the source of life itself. I wanted mercy, but I did not know where to find it. I wanted grace, but I had never learned how to receive it. Just as despair reached its deepest point, something changed. A piercing brightness appeared in the distance, not blinding at first, but undeniable. It cut through the darkness like a blade through cloth. With the light came a presence, powerful yet gentle, authoritative yet filled with compassion. As it drew closer, my fear intensified and softened at the same time. I knew without being told that this presence knew me completely. I sensed that everything I believed about salvation was about to be confronted. The light grew stronger, and just before it reached me, I understood that this moment would either destroy me or redefine me forever. I hovered between terror and longing, suspended on the edge of an answer my soul had secretly searched for since childhood without rest. The presence moved closer until the light surrounded me completely, and then I heard my name spoken with a clarity that shattered me. Kareem, not shouted, not questioned, but known. When that voice spoke, the darkness lost its power, and I understood that I was not facing condemnation but truth. I saw him then, not as an image shaped by culture or art, but as reality itself. His eyes held authority and sorrow intertwined, not disappointment, but grief for how long I had lived without rest. I collapsed inwardly, overwhelmed by a love that exposed everything without rejecting me. I expected accusation, a list of failures, a verdict. Instead, I felt understanding deeper than language. He showed me my heart, not to shame me, but to heal me. I saw years of fear mistaken for devotion, obedience driven by terror, and pride hidden beneath ritual. I realized I had been trying to earn what was never meant to be earned. He did not speak many words, yet every word carried weight beyond sound. Salvation is not a scale, he said. It is a gift. I understood then that no amount of striving could bridge the distance I felt all my life. He was the bridge. Peace poured into me, warm and overwhelming, dissolving the panic that had defined my faith. I felt seen, fully, and still wanted. I knew instantly who he was, though no one had ever described him to me this way. This was Jesus. Not a prophet in a list, not a story debated in theology, but living truth standing before me. He did not pull me toward religion. He invited me into relationship. Follow me, he said, and tell them what you have seen. With those words came purpose, not imposed but offered. I wanted to stay, to remain in that presence forever, but I sensed time pressing against me. The light began to soften, the warmth receding, and a gentle urgency filled the space. You must return, he said, and I felt myself falling backward, not in fear but in obedience. As the brightness faded, I carried something new within me, not answers to every question, but certainty where doubt once lived. I knew my life would never be the same, and I accepted that truth without resistance as everything dissolved and the world I had known rushed back toward me. I did not understand doctrine or theology in that moment, only love that required nothing in return. For the first time, I was not afraid of God, and that realization alone changed everything I thought I knew about faith. I carried that certainty like breath itself. As consciousness slipped away again into my body, I woke up gasping as if I had been pulled out of deep water, my body convulsing while machines screamed around me. Voices shouted my name, hands pressed against my chest, and someone cried out that I was back. Light burned my eyes as consciousness rushed in, but what overwhelmed me was not pain, it was clarity. I knew where I had been, and I knew who had spoken to me. As my breathing steadied and the room quieted, doctors stared at monitors in disbelief. 20 minutes without a pulse was not survivable, not without damage, not without explanation. Yet I was awake, alert, and strangely calm. Inside me there was a peace I had never known, steady and warm, untouched by fear. When they finally left me alone in the ICU, surrounded by humming machines and dim lights, the weight of what had happened settled over me. I whispered his name, barely daring to say it aloud, Jesus. Tears streamed down my face without warning, not from confusion, but recognition. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and locked the screen so no one could see. I searched quietly and downloaded a Bible app, my heart racing as if I were committing a crime. I opened the Gospel of John and began to read slowly, afraid that the words might disappear if I rushed. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Something inside me burned as I read. Every verse felt alive, confirming what I had seen, what I had heard. When I reached the words, I am the way, the truth, and the life, my body shook. I was not reading information, I was remembering him. I prayed, not formally, not carefully, but honestly. Jesus, if you are real, I am listening. I am yours. There was no fear in that prayer, only surrender, but as the peace settled, another emotion crept in, sharp and cold. Reality. I was a Muslim doctor in a Muslim family in a Muslim community. Following Jesus would cost me everything I had ever known. My career, my marriage, my family, my safety. I stared at the hospital door, knowing who would walk through it soon. The peace did not leave, but it was tested by dread. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, familiar voices approached, and I understood that the hardest part of my awakening was not dying, but living out what I now believed. As the door opened and my family entered, I took a slow breath, knowing that the truth I carried could no longer be hidden, and that my life was about to change in ways I could not control or undo. My wife sat beside my bed with swollen eyes, her hands shaking as she clutched mine as if I were slipping away again. When I told her what I had seen, her face drained of color. She begged me to rest, to stop speaking nonsense brought on by trauma. When I said the name Jesus, her grip tightened, then released. She began to cry, not softly, but with the sound of mourning. My father arrived soon after, his presence heavy, his voice sharp with authority. He did not ask how I felt. He asked what I had said. When I told him, his face hardened into something I had never seen before. He said I had brought shame on our bloodline, that illness had made me weak, that I must repent immediately. An imam was called. He stood at the foot of my bed and spoke calmly of hellfire, of apostasy, of consequences that extended beyond this life. Every word pressed against my chest like a weight. Fear surged through me, familiar and powerful. I imagined losing my family, my reputation, my protection. I imagined my children growing up without me. For hours after they left, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, torn between safety and truth. I whispered prayers out of habit, then stopped. I remembered his voice, the peace that had no condition, the love that did not threaten. I realized that returning to silence would cost me my soul. Late that night, with the ward quiet and the city asleep, I turned my face toward the wall and spoke softly, afraid of being heard yet unable to stay silent. Jesus, I believe you. I choose you. The words felt dangerous and freeing at the same time. Nothing exploded. No fire fell. Instead, a quiet strength settled over me. I knew then that obedience would not protect me from pain, but it would anchor me in truth. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew who I belonged to, and for the first time in my life, fear no longer had the final word. In that moment, I understood that faith was not inherited or enforced, but chosen alone, and that choice had already separated me from everything familiar. I lay there listening to my heartbeat, steady and unafraid, realizing that life had returned to me with purpose, not permission, and that whatever I lost by speaking truth would never compare to what I had gained by finally saying yes. The cost was terrifying, but the silence I had lived in before was far worse than any consequence waiting beyond that hospital door. I closed my eyes, accepting that obedience had already begun within. After I left the hospital, life did not return to normal. It unraveled quietly and then all at once. Friends stopped calling. Colleagues avoided my eyes in the corridors. Whispers followed me through the hospital like shadows. Questions spoken just loud enough to wound but not confront. Someone told me I had lost my mind. Someone else said I was dangerous. Invitations disappeared. Trust evaporated. My title remained, but my place was gone. At home, tension filled every room. My wife barely spoke, torn between fear and love, between the man she married and the faith she was taught to defend. Nights were the hardest. I lay awake listening to the sound of my own breathing, wondering how truth could feel so lonely. More than once I considered silence, not denial, just quiet compliance. But every time I imagined going back, I felt that darkness again. One evening, alone, I opened the Bible and read words that felt written for my fear. Perfect love casts out fear. I wept openly, ashamed of nothing for the first time. Through a hidden forum, I found other believers like me, former Muslims meeting quietly online, praying in whispers, sharing testimonies through screens. They did not ask me to prove anything. They simply welcomed me. For the first time, I belonged without performing. Scripture began to replace the fear etched into my mind since childhood. Grace replaced the constant measuring. I realized that Christianity had not destroyed my life. It had exposed the cage I had lived in. Still, loss continued. My father stopped speaking to me. My reputation eroded. I was warned to be careful, to stay quiet. But something inside me was no longer negotiable. Truth had taken root. One night, I received a message asking me to meet. My father and the imam wanted to speak. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart pounding. I knew what awaited me was confrontation, perhaps final. I prayed, not for escape but for courage. As I closed my phone, I felt a strange calm. Whatever happened next would reveal whether my faith was temporary comfort or unshakable truth. I thought of Jesus standing before me, unashamed of truth, unmoved by threat, and I knew I could not hide anymore. My life had already changed. Now it would be tested openly, without shelter, without applause, only faith. The silence before that meeting felt heavier than death, but deeper than fear was the certainty that I would not deny what had saved me that night. I met my father and the imam in a small room that smelled of old books and brewed tea, a place where authority usually felt unbreakable. They sat across from me, waiting, confident that fear would finish what pressure had started. My father spoke first, his voice tight with anger and pain, telling me I was destroying our family, that repentance could still erase this shame. The imam followed, calm and sharp, quoting warnings about apostasy, reminding me of consequences meant to silence the soul. I listened without interrupting, my hands steady on my knees, my heart pounding but not fleeing. When they finished, the room fell quiet, heavy with expectation. I did not argue verses. I did not defend doctrine. I simply told the truth. I said I had died, that my heart had stopped, that there was no metaphor in it. I told them about the darkness, the fear, the certainty that nothing I had done could save me. I told them how Jesus spoke my name, how his presence carried authority without threat and love without condition. As I spoke, my father's face hardened, then cracked. The imam's eyes narrowed, searching for weakness. They accused me of hallucination, of deception, of betrayal. I felt the old fear rise, the instinct to retreat, to soften the truth to survive. Instead, I breathed and continued. I said I was not asking permission, and I was not seeking debate. I said I was alive because of Jesus, and I would not deny him. Silence followed, thick and final. My father stood, his chair scraping the floor, and said I was no longer his son if I continued this path. The words cut deeply, but they did not undo me. I stood as well, my legs trembling, and nodded, tears burning but unashamed. I thanked them for listening. As I walked out, my chest felt lighter despite the grief pressing in. Outside, the air felt different, as if I had crossed an invisible line. I did not know what my future would look like, where I would belong, or how much more I would lose. But I knew this. I was free. For the first time, my faith did not depend on fear, approval, or survival. It rested on truth. I walked away with nothing guaranteed except Jesus, and somehow that was enough to carry me forward into an uncertain life I no longer feared. Every step away from that room felt like surrender and victory intertwined, grief and hope colliding within me, yet beneath it all was a steady assurance that obedience mattered more than acceptance, and that losing everything for truth was not loss at all but gain eternal.